Treasures, a celebration of inclusion from the University of New Hampshire. Here's one story of treasure. Welcome to the third grade, said a colorful poster on the wall of Golden Brook Elementary School. There was a rocking chair with a funny hat perched on it in front of about 25 children, sharing their writing journals with one another. As I looked around the room, I wondered, is this a trick? Maybe there really isn't a student with disabilities in this room. All I see are 25 ordinary children. I kept my eyes peeled for that special child. Was it the child with the glasses sitting quietly on my right? Or the blonde-haired child sprawled on his belly on my left? I looked more closely and spotted a small cluster of children gently helping to focus one little girl's attention on the lesson. It was explained to me that Devon, the little girl I had finally found, has been fully included in this school for 3 years. As I watched, I wondered why anyone would consider the whole notion of including children a big deal. This was a perfect picture right in front of my eyes. There were 25 children learning together, not 24 plus Devon, but 25. Why were some school systems in the United States still fighting and spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep children out? Education is meant to bring people in. Here in New Hampshire, the doors are open to all. If this lovely school could make inclusion a reality, why not everywhere? So, and I will put a link to this in my show notes. This book was written by a number of authors, names that I'm sure some of you know, like Cheryl Jorgensen, the foreword by Marcia Forrest. Yeah, I mean, it's so if you are here today because you want to have a story treasure about your child being included, this is the place for you to be. So stay tuned because we're going to be talking about specific things that you can do. So your child is not just included on paper, but actually actively participating and learning beside their classmates. So stay. You know, I think a common dream for parents is to have written on their child's IEP that they will be included for 80% of the time. It's like, whew, it can take years of advocacy to get that, right? And I get it. I understand. I remember those days advocating for our son. And, you know, even when Dylan was 3 years old, we were concerned about the least restrictive environment. In fact, we filed for due process when we were at an impasse with the school district where I also taught. Because to us, if we wanted Dylan to be included in elementary school, like, why wouldn't he be included in a community preschool instead of a special ed preschool class? So LRE is often that big hill that parents are willing to die on, right? And so I know that inclusion is probably close to your heart, like it is to mine. And the thing that I want us to realize is that just having our children in a classroom does not mean they're included, because we need to do more than giving a child a seat, a chair at the back table, maybe their own desk in the room. We know, right? It's got to be actively participating, like actually doing things with the other kids. So on paper, it might look like your child is included for maybe 80% of the day. But in reality, what might that look like? So here's some examples of what I'm calling the illusion of inclusion. Let me get a drink of water. And welcome to you. The illusion of inclusion can look like many different things. One way is I look at just the beginning of the day when kids are dropped off by the bus, by their parents, they walk to school. And what door do they go in? And this may seem like, Charmaine, come on, who cares, you know? I care. I think it sets the tone, because when I see some students walking around the side of the building so they can go knock on the outside door of the special ed room, go in the special ed room where they're going to start their day. And I see all these other kids going through the front door, walking to their home rooms, and starting their day in their classroom with their community. So how your child starts the day, right? Because you also look at things that happen during the day, or, you know, at the start of the day, there's announcements, there's just kind of some chatter back and forth and seeing your friends. And if that's not what your child is experiencing when they're beginning their day, then I think that's an illusion of inclusion, that your child is starting his day or her day in the special ed room. So what's another example of an illusion of inclusion? So as an advocate, I'll do a lot of observing in schools. And one of the things that I like to see is, like, you know, how do they transition from lunch or recess back to the general ed classroom? Does the para pick them up after lunch, and do they go to the special ed room and have a break, and then they go back to their general ed classroom? Well, one day I was observing, and what I noticed, it was after lunch, and all the kids came in, they're chattering, right, and, you know, having a good time. The teacher gets them quieted down. They all sit on the floor in front of her. And she opens a book and she starts reading aloud the next chapter in Charlotte's Web. And I look, and the student that has an IEP is sitting at the back table working with another adult. And when I wander back to see what they're doing, they're working on a phonics sheet. So that is an illusion of inclusion. If your child is on that island of the mainstream working with an adult on something totally different, your child isn't being included. So as we're sharing these examples, share some of your own in the comments, because I want you to also identify what are some illusions of inclusions that either your child has experienced or that you know has happened to friends. Hey, Lisa, thanks for being here live. And if you're watching the replay, know that you can come and type in questions or comments, and I'll come back after the show and answer those. So, Lissa, can you think of any illusions of inclusions when you thought your son was being included with typical kids and that wasn't quite what was happening? So another illusion of inclusion was when I was observing a high school biology class, and all the students were paired up with another student as their lab partner. And the student that had the IEP was paired up with a paraeducator as a lab partner. So the teacher gets the class started, and the hands-on activity that they're doing that day is to dissect a frog. Now, this child on the IEP has been really looking forward to doing this, has been talking about it, at home and everything. Well, come to find out, the school was concerned about safety. And so the student wasn't with a lab partner doing the hands-on science activity. Instead, the para was sitting beside the child, and the child had this biology textbook and was just kind of thumbing through the pages and occasionally stopping and looking at a photo. Well, the IEP might say they're included for high school biology, but if this is an example of what they're doing, this is an illusion of inclusion, right? Yes, Kate says lunch. Yeah. And I'm very old. So I went to college in the 70s. I student taught in 1974. And I was, one of my student teaching experiences was in a self-contained special ed class in an elementary school. And the kids didn't even go to lunch in the lunchroom. They had lunch in the special ed room. And it was like, so when I think back to 1974 and the example of what I saw as, I don't know, state of the art or status quo for special ed was such a segregated concept of, really? And even then it was like, why can't these kids go to the lunchroom? So yeah, see what happens at lunch. Are there like designated tables where the kids from the special ed room eat? Are they going to lunch at the same time the general ed class is going to lunch? Let me get a drink. So Beth has another example. Thank you. So Beth says, my student was pulled into the special ed room to work with other special ed students when the rest of the class worked on group projects in general ed. Yeah, so it's like, look at that rich learning. I was a special ed teacher for 15 years, and I went to the classroom so I could include kids. And I tell you from firsthand experience, the general ed class is so rich, and the learning that happens, the incidental learning, and just the curriculum and everything is so much richer. So for kids to miss out on those group projects when that's maybe the best way that they learn, it's like so sad. So Beth also says, my son used to sit at a separate table in the lunchroom with all of the other SPED kids in Paris. Yeah. And I always talk about how our son Dylan was fully included. And so this was back in the 90s. But, what was interesting, And for us, we were so happy with what inclusion looked like for Dylan when he was in, especially in elementary school. It was a real rich, true experience. We saw more illusions of inclusions in middle school and high school. But so one of the stories I heard, which I had no idea was happening, was when Dylan was in high school, he was a freshman. And depending on what, they had, for the hot lunch, sometimes he bought a lunch, sometimes he brought a lunch. But the teacher was telling me, she said, "Oh, Dylan is so helpful at lunch." And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "Yeah, he likes sitting over there by himself by the door." And my first thought was like, that doesn't sound like a happy picture. And she goes, "No," she said, "his job is to make sure that the kids don't go down the hall during lunch period. Like that's sectioned off that, kids aren't supposed to be in." And so, part of me was like, he's eating lunch by himself. Part of me is like, I don't know. Does he feel good about having this job? So I talked to Dylan, and he actually felt important that he had this job. So sometimes, the lesson is we can't assume, right? We can't assume that inclusion is happening. And that's the thing that we want to be aware of. And then we'll be talking about some specific things that I don't think get suggested very often. So how we can work around this and pull the curtains back from that illusion. So Kate, thanks for being here. She says some of them were doing a science experiment and she was allowed to watch. Yeah, but not participate in dissecting a frog, which she had done before in 8th grade class successfully. Yeah, see, and it's like, gee, and that's, part of that a need that we see as far as having staff understand, like, we have to have higher expectations and we have to know about our students and what they've done before and how we can build on that. And so assuming that it's not a good idea for whatever reason for her to be a part of the actual dissection and only watching, I mean, like, you are a bystander. You are still out. You are not with. You are not with the other students. And yes, there's going to be times when some kids will need modifications, but that's okay. They're still participating. They're still learning and actively doing things with their classmates. So, yeah, thanks for those examples. And yeah, so Kate or Beth, Lissa, others that are here with us live, what tips would you give other parents? Like, how can we stop this from happening, right? So let's go into that part. We can talk about some specific tips. So I think it's very common, especially for elementary age students, for parents to have a one-pager, an About Me profile. They're called different things. And it talks about, it's just this one-pager, so it's nice and concise for the teachers. And it's what works, what doesn't work for your child, your child's vision, what their hopes are, your vision for your child, strengths that they have, specific, unique needs. It's this one-page summary. So typically that gets shared in at the beginning of the year. Some parents email it to the teachers ahead of school starting. Some, physically share it the first day of school. That one pager has excellent information on it, and it can be so helpful. So one, you want to make sure everybody sees it. like the music teacher, like the lunch person, like for sure the para, right? If there's a para supporting the child, any kind of related service people. However, the mistake that I see is we share that wonderful document one time at the beginning of the year. And being a teacher, I know things can get piled up on your desk. And so what I'm encouraging you to do is to find other kind of natural times during the year that you can reintroduce that one page About Me profile. And you might even have some updates to it. So an easy thing to remember for me is like each quarter, if your school's on a quarter basis. So each quarter, maybe before or after you get your child's progress report, have an informal meeting, share it again through the email, but talk about it and kind of refresh everyone's memory. Because I think that can be so helpful. So Barb is a former teacher, inclusionistic, wonderful friend. She says, oh my, Charmaine, such a good point and idea. Reintroduce it. Yeah, repurpose, right? It's like when you go to IEP meetings, that's another time that you can share it. When you have parent-teacher conferences. So kind of think of natural times during the school year that you can bring that back up. So Lissa is from Idaho, and Lissa says, my word of advice, speak up and have a voice if you have a concern. Complacency won't get change. Thank you, Lissa. Yes. And Beth says, I think it's more powerful when the child plays a part in creating that sheet. Exactly, Beth. Thank you. Yeah, I am a big proponent of, even when our kids are young, to be involved. So Dylan attended not the real contentious IEP meetings, but Dylan at age 3 started going to his own IEP meetings. At age 3, we had the IEP meeting at our house. So Dylan could be playing with his toys and his dogs, and the IEP team members from the school could see him in his home in his natural setting. So it became a tradition for us to always have Dylan there. So I encourage you to do that. And it doesn't mean that they have to be sitting at a conference table. For kindergarten, we had his IEP meeting in the kindergarten class, and which meant we all sat on these little chairs. But Dylan could be in the centers during the meeting. And every once in a while we could say, hey, Dylan, come over here, tell us about your friends or whatever. And he'd go off, and, later we'd say, hey, Dylan, what do you think? And so, yeah, giving kids that participation is so important, because you're building those self-advocacy skills. And for sure, they need those as they go on in life, right? Kate, she said, we also have it so it's given to all the kids she sits with in a pod, so they know things about her to talk to her, for the most part non-speaking. So isn't that such a great idea, Kate? Yeah, and that's the thing, that I think about a lot too is, we have a big emphasis on sharing these about me's with the teachers and the staff. And it's like, well, what are we doing to connect our kids to the other, their classmates in the general ed class? So, Kate, I love that idea for kids to get to know her. And then the thing that I would tag on is have those kids in her pod give a sheet about them to your daughter, and you could read those to her, and that way your daughter would get to know. Because that's one thing that bugs me about, if it's not like everyone, So I'm thinking of some parents. I didn't do this, and I think, everyone has their own ways of doing things. So, but there are parents I know that will come into class and do kind of a story, read a story to younger kids, about like Down syndrome or something, and have like this special presentation about their child. And what I love about that is it helps connect kids on a kid level. What bugs me about it is then it just makes our kids again as this like separate thing. So if we could have other kids, and of course, it's not going to work for everyone's parent to come in and do a presentation, but and I know we do like Star Student of the Week and things like that. So I just caution ourselves to think about, as a parent, what's the best way for me to connect with classmates? I think being able to connect to some of their parents, getting permission to, get the parents' email address, set up play dates. And it doesn't have to be like at a fancy place or Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, it could be a play date on the playground with your kids. So trying to find those natural settings of how you can get other kids to get to know your child, and for your child to get to know their classmates, right? So yeah. And the other thing, Kate, I wonder about, because I hear different ways of doing this also, but so does your daughter use a communication device? And the one thing that I learned from a parent in Colorado Springs was she had the neatest phrases and greetings on her son's communication device. So, instead of just saying, hello, how are you? It was like, what's up? So I just wonder if your daughter has those kind of slang expressions that she can also say to her peers. And then the other question I had for you was, Kate, is I've also seen in classrooms where there's another communication device, like another iPad with that, app or whatever. So students can use that communication device that your daughter uses and communicate back and forth instead of them being verbal and her using the device. I don't know. So something to think about. Let me silence my phone. So let's see. Hey, Anne Marie from South Carolina. I love this question. What's the best practice for a communication sheet for parents, teachers to share information about a child's day? So I love this. And especially at the beginning of the year. And so I think the best practice is for you as a parent to figure out what you really want to know, because there's a million communication forms like Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers. But the best practice is the communication form is going to have what you need. So for some parents, they need to know how many ounces of liquid their child had at school that day. Now, if you go to Pinterest, there's probably not many communication sheets that say how many ounces of liquid did my child have. There's, certain kids, that the parent needs to know about, like the toileting that happened at school that day. there's times when the parent needs to know what's coming up next in science so we can start talking about that at home. So you really need to figure out what you want. And then the second step is to talk with the staff and develop something that's going to be easy yet meaningful. And that's where I think the problem comes in with a lot of communication sheets, like having smiley faces or frowny faces, for like reading, smiley face, science, frowny face. I mean, like, what? That doesn't tell you anything. And it depends on the age of your child. I've seen some communication sheets where the child is the one that records, certain information, like highlights from each class period. So it depends on the age of your child. But really the best practice is first figuring out what you want. And I'm actually, because I love developing custom GPTs. So that's like one that I have like so many on my list of what I want to create. But I think that would be cool. You could, the custom GPT could ask parents different questions and see what the information is that they need, and then see about developing the actual communication form. I mean, a spiral notebook that goes back and forth from school is fine. The thing is, you really, to me, want specifics on the IEP about how often the communication log, if it's going to be daily, weekly, whatever, and some specifics written there in order to make sure it happens. Because, you might have a para that's like a dream and she's always writing so much good stuff for you. And then she gets transferred and you have a new para and she's like, what? I don't have time to do that. So you want to have the specifics in the IEP. So Kate says, yes, we have also tried to get friends info and the school refuses to give out any info on other students, even a first name only. So what you can do as like a workaround, Kate, is you can give the school permission to do it a couple of ways. You can give the school permission to share your contact information, and that can be in a class newsletter. Jamie's mom would love to, set up some play dates. Here's her email, whatever. Or it could be a note that goes home from you and the school approves a note and you give your information. So you might try to do that. She says, Beth says, where do you suggest they get written in? I was told it can't be an accommodation as far as a communication notebook. So, and it depends on what your IEP form looks like. I work in a variety of states and have seen lots of different IEP forms. However, one place that I've been successful for them to put the communication notebook in writing is in the optional statement of service delivery. And that was actually one of our tips was that optional statement of service delivery is usually under the table that says they're going to have so many minutes of time, direct service from the SLP, special ed, how much, under that table is usually a paragraph that says optional statement of service delivery. And that paragraph, or more than one paragraph, really is supposed to give everyone a clear idea of what all those minutes mean and what your child's day is going to really look like. So we can talk about that optional statement of service delivery as a place to have it written out, what the communication will be, the frequency, who will do it. And, like I said, an agreed upon form with the staff. And the optional statement of service delivery can also be a place where you really get it understood that what this inclusion is going to look like, and if there's push-in services or what. So yeah, that's an important part of the IEP that I think people, even teachers, kind of like, what is this? A lot of times SLPs will put in their, our services will be individual or small group, depending on the student's need, so they have kind of these generic things. But as you know, to be more specific is better. So Kate says, unfortunately, they won't do that. I think she's talking about giving parents her information. Because we filed a state complaint. I had communication log under accommodations, but since I filed, the district took it off, and all the kids in the district. Yeah. So yeah, that's like a whole nother circumstance, right? So yeah, that's like a whole nother show, right? As far as like retaliation kinds of things. So I'm sorry that happened, because yeah, and then for them to remove it for all kids. Yeah. So Anne Marie, hello. Is there any reason why a school cannot complete a communication sheet? Well, let's think. Is there any reason? I'll tell you the reasons I hear. We don't have time. We're trying to work with students, not do paperwork. The parent's not allowed to communicate with the parent. You get progress reports, and that's how you get informed. I don't know. Those are probably the common reasons why people say they can't do the communication form. And that's why I say, like, you really want to have the most important information that you need. And if it's like how many ounces of liquid your child had that day, that's like a quick number they write, right? There's the question, there's a blank, and it says ounce, and they write a number. So that is like critical information for some families, and that takes like a second, right? And then again, if there's a way to have things that are checked and leave the narrative part for the most important, or I think if you ask for less narrative, they're going to be willing to do it more. However, that narrative part for me is what is more meaningful, right? And I mean, I've been in some, and last year I had so many IEP meetings where the special ed teachers were like, what do you mean? What do you want? And we're like, we want to know like what they're doing in science and how much she was able to do, and did she enjoy it, and is there homework, or it's so if you go into your meeting knowing what you need for information, you'll be miles ahead, because otherwise there's not this back and forth of, well, what do you mean? I don't understand. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the other question, and Anne-Marie, you might have heard me say this before, that I like to use from Chris Voss, who is my friend. I don't have his book here. Oh, I got a giveaway. Don't let me forget to do the giveaway. Chris Voss, ex-FBI hostage negotiator, one of his questions that he asks that I love to tell parents to use is, would it be a ridiculous idea to, and then you say, so you could say, would it be a ridiculous idea to get daily communication from the school? And then you're quiet and you wait. And it's amazing. I have gotten a $500 refund, which technically they really didn't have to give me, by using that question. Would it be a ridiculous idea? So anyway, and it works in special ed situations too. So yeah, I think the big thing is time, and how to fit that into the routine of the adult's day. However, I mean, depending on your child, you know, you might have them, what was your favorite thing in science? What book did you read in reading? And maybe your child writes it down. And then there's a narrative at the end from an adult. So let me see. And says, those sound like objections, but nothing in the law. Yeah, I don't think there's, I'm not an attorney, and I can't give legal advice. However, speaking as a professional advocate, I don't know of anything in the law that would be a reason why they can't fill out a communication log. Yeah. And so, like you say, you know, I mean, if you would say in a meeting, is there any reason why we can't have a communication log? The reasons they're going to give you are the time and all of that. But yeah, those are, you know, kind of stumbling blocks for the staff. But, you know, but on the same hand, if they don't, I mean, then you have to, like, I won't go down that rabbit hole. So we're going to go back. So some things that you can do to uncloak that illusion of inclusion. The first one we talked about is sharing your About Me profile and sharing it more often. The other one I wanted to mention to you is connecting the dots between your child's strengths and their accommodations. So, I don't think enough people really look at the strengths that's listed in your child's IEP and then reflects on like, oh, so how could I use that when I'm teaching so-and-so? So as a parent, you have to help connect those dots. So one, you have to make sure there's a good explanation and list of strengths in your child's IEP. Besides, they have a great smile and they're friendly. Look at the strengths that your child has, and then it's like, oh, so if your child, you know, learns more by hands-on tactile kinds of things, then that could be translated. We could connect the dots and have that as an accommodation in your child's IEP. So, you know, what that could look like is, yes, you know, one of the choices is that we have a hands-on activity, more project-based, for ways that your child can show what they've learned instead of writing a 5-page essay or something. So the other tip I wanted to give you was to really talk through the daily schedule of your child. The best way to find out if there's these illusions of inclusions going on in the school is by you being there to observe. And I know because of parents' work schedules and everything, that isn't always possible. So if you can't go and observe actually what's happening, then I really want you to sit down, you know, with that schedule that hopefully you got at the beginning of the year and say, okay, so I see, you know, my child's in general ed for reading from 9 to 9:30. Can you give me a picture of what that looks like? And that's the conversation that you can have with the adults. And that's a conversation that you can have with your child. And of course, it depends on your child's age and everything. However, to find out, like, oh, I heard Miss Thomas reads a book after lunch. Do you remember anything about the book, or where do you sit there on the floor, or do you have your chair? I don't know, but just different questions for the adults and for your child as to what that daily schedule looks like. The other one we've talked about is reading the optional statement of service delivery. And if it's really not clear in there what it looks like when your child's included, then you want to add, have conversation and have extra language added there. And then the last tip I'll share with you is to think about natural proportions. And I don't think this gets talked about enough. And the idea of, and I have my shirt, I don't want to forget the giveaway. So you have to make comments to get a giveaway, to get the shirt. So make comments. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. Natural proportion. So if in your school, about 12% of the students have disabilities, in that, 7th grade classroom, about 12% of the kids probably have a disability. If you see that natural proportion tipping, which happens a lot, I think, especially in secondary, is like there's this whole little group of kids that like move from class to class. So they're included. And actually, this happened with Dylan when he was in middle school. So there's 3 or 4 kids, that are on IEPs, and they go to all the same classes together. And that tips that scale of natural proportions. So that's something to look at. And that was one of the basis of our argument when we filed for due process when our son Dylan was 3, because our district had a special ed preschool class, which was in the same building I taught. And my friend was a special ed preschool teacher. However, their proportions were 50% of kids with disabilities and 50% of kids without disabilities. And they called that an inclusive special ed or an inclusive preschool class. And I'm like, no, 50-50 is not natural proportions. That's not the least restrictive environment. So natural proportions has always been in the back of my mind when I think about the illusion of inclusion. And I hope that you also will think about that. So Anne says, I tend to disagree for proposed removal from general ed to work and goals. Yeah, so I think what you're saying is, so is your daughter getting push-in services then when she's working on her IEP goals in the general ed class? And that, again, can be like a whole another show where you might have seen them before. It's like an IEP matrix where you look at the IEP goals your child has, and then down this column, you look at your child's daily schedule. And, your child has, a math goal of counting, up to 30 or something. And it's like, well, they don't just have to do that in the special ed class, Counting is something like, wow, they could do that all the time throughout the day, like counting how many kids have cold lunch today, or counting how many kids are there and how many kids are absent. I mean, so that's a mindset we need to help both teachers and parents understand, that there's a lot of ways our kids can be working on their IEP goals in more natural settings. So, pull up at missing core curriculum. Yeah, so that's another thing, right? It's like you want to make sure, when they're included for a percentage of the day, to ask. And that's why you want to look at that daily schedule. So out of this time, she's going to be, included 40 to 79% of the day, how much of that time is she getting core curriculum in the general ed class? Because that's one of the basics of, IDEA is that our kids have access to the general ed curriculum. And if they're not in there for core curriculum, they're not getting access to it. So I love the conversation. I do have an IEP meeting I have to go to. So I want to show you the shirt. You might have, if you follow my page, The Art of Advocacy, every once in a while I post a picture of this. So it says, when someone is truly included, no one will question their presence, only their absence. So what I'm going to do is, I haven't done this in a while. I close my eyes and I scroll through the comments. So if you want to make another quick comment here, give me a word that summarizes what you felt about today, or give me a word about, some inspiration that you have that we can all do. So comment, and this is what you can be winning. And so I'm going to close my eyes. I don't need my glasses. And you won't, I'm sorry, you can't see it, but on my side, I see the comments. And trust me, I'm scrolling through the comments, and then I'm going to stop on somebody. And this is who I stopped on. Now I need my glasses. Lissa, how cool. Lissa. So, Lissa, I don't know if I have your mailing address. This is the winner of this t-shirt. And since I love this t-shirt so much, I think I'll probably put another drawing for a t-shirt here. Maybe later tonight, because I want more people to wear these. So thank you for being here today. If you are new, I'm Charmaine Tanner, and my passion is to support parents so their kids are safe, happy, and getting the education that they deserve. So we do these live shows twice a month. I hope to see you in September. So take care. And I have music.